Hello and welcome to Heist Stories for Sleep. Thank you for joining me here tonight. We are going to relax and let the busy day fall away. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just find a comfortable position and allow your body to feel heavy and supported. Tonight's story is a quiet one, a story about time and connection in an unexpected place. There are no jumps here, no gore. Just a calm, unhurried story to help guide you toward rest. Your only task is to listen to the sound of my voice and to breathe in and out. Let's begin. Our story takes place in a city of water and stone, a city spread across 14 islands where a lake meets the sea. This is Stockholm in the last warm days of August 1973. Imagine the morning light, soft and golden, catching the green copper roofs of the old city. The air is clear and carries the faint, clean scent of the Baltic. On the water, small white ferries glide between the islands like sleepy swans, their engines a distant, gentle hum. The city is waking slowly. In the grand square called Norrmalmstorg, the morning is especially peaceful. It is a wide, open space framed by impressive buildings of pale stone. Trees in large planters rustle their leaves in a soft breeze. The sound of the city is muted here. The distant rumble of a tram, the polite chime of a shop door opening, the murmur of voices from the few people crossing the cobblestones on their way to work. At the center of the square, a fountain whispers to itself. Water rises and falls in gentle arcs, sparkling in the new sunlight. The city breathes. It is a place of order, of predictability. The street cleaners have already come and gone, leaving the pavements damp and clean. The day promises to be like the one before it and the one before that. A peaceful, ordinary Thursday. On one side of this grand square stands the Kreditbanken, one of Sweden's largest banks. Its facade is strong and reassuring, made of stone and glass. Polished brass signs gleam beside the heavy doors. Through the tall windows you can see the interior. A vast, quiet hall with a high ceiling. The floors are polished marble, cool and reflective. The air inside is always still, always hushed, carrying the scent of paper and old money. It feels more like a library or a cathedral than a place of business. In these early hours, the bank is a place of quiet routine. Clerks arrange their desks, their movements slow and practiced. The soft click of a date stamp, the rustle of a ledger page turning. Everything is in its place. The people of Stockholm trust this place. It is a symbol of the city itself, solid, dependable, and calm. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows of the grand buildings shrink across the square. It is just another day beginning with a soft and steady rhythm. At a small table outside a cafe on the corner of the square, a man sits alone. He sips his coffee slowly, his gaze directed toward the entrance of the Kreditbanken. His name is Jan Erik Olsson, but people who know him call him Janne. He is not a large man. He is dressed in a simple jacket, his hair a little long in the style of the time. There is nothing about him that draws the eye. He is just another face in the morning crowd, but his stillness is different. While others read their newspapers or chat with friends, Janne just watches. His eyes follow the bank employees as they arrive, one by one. He watches the security guard unlock the main doors at precisely 10 o'clock. He notes the rhythm of the place, the way people move in and out. A quiet exchange with the waitress is all he says. "Just the coffee, thank you." His voice is even, calm. He is a study in patience. He observes the flow of customers, a mother with a stroller, an elderly man in a fine wool coat, a young woman who works at the perfume counter across the square. He sees them not as people, but as patterns, as part of the bank's daily dance. His presence is not threatening. It is simply attentive. He seems to be memorizing the feeling of the morning, the specific quality of the August light, the sound of the fountain, the gentle pace of this peaceful corner of the world. He has been gone from this city for some time. Being here now feels both familiar and strange. The sounds, the smells, the crisp northern air, they are all as he remembered. But he is different. He is here with a singular purpose, an idea that has been growing in his mind for months, an idea that feels less like a choice and more like a destination. He finishes his coffee, leaves a few coins on the table and stands. He feels the weight of the bag he carries, a simple canvas satchel. It does not make him anxious. It feels like an anchor, a solid point in a world that is about to change. He waits for a tram to pass, its bell ringing softly, and then he begins to walk across the square. The plan in Jana's mind was not a set of complicated diagrams or frantic notes. It was simpler, more like a story he had told himself over and over again until it felt like a memory. It was a story of walking out of the shadows and into a different life. In the quiet solitude of the past year, this story had been his only companion. It had grown from a whisper to a clear, calm voice. The story was not about chaos. It was about control. It was about creating a small sealed world where the rules were his own, a place where time would slow down and the loud, complicated world outside would have to stop and listen. He didn't imagine noise and panic. In his mind, it was a quiet, orderly affair, a transaction. He had something they wanted, their safety, their peace of mind, and they had something he needed. He had thought about the building itself. He knew its layout from public records, from memory. He pictured the main hall, the stairs leading down to the vault. The vault was the heart of the story, a place of strength, a fortress. He imagined it not as a cage, but as a sanctuary, a place where he and a few others would wait. He felt no anger toward the people who worked there. They were simply characters in his story, people who would share this quiet space with him for a short time. This idea felt solid, real. It wasn't a dream of riches to be spent on fast cars or lavish parties. It was an idea of leverage. The money was a key, a tool to unlock a different door. The most important part of the plan was a name, Clark Olofsson, a friend, a fellow traveler on the wrong side of the law. The plan required him. Jana knew he could not do it alone, not because of the physical challenge, but because of the waiting. The waiting required a certain kind of companionship, a shared understanding. The story in his head had two main characters, and he was about to write the first chapter. He walked across the square, his footsteps making no sound that anyone would notice. The sunlight was warm on his face. For a moment, he was just a man crossing a square on a beautiful summer morning. The city continued its gentle hum all around him, unaware that its rhythm was about to pause. The heavy glass doors of the credit bank swung inward, with a soft hush of cool, conditioned air. The world outside, with its warm sun and fountain sounds, was suddenly gone, replaced by the deep, reverent quiet of the bank hall. The air was still. The light, filtering through the high windows, was soft and hazy. Jana stood for a moment just inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The polished marble floor reflected the scene like dark water. He walked toward the center of the room. There were perhaps a dozen people inside, tellers behind their grills, a few customers at the counter, managers in glass-walled offices. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He slung the canvas bag from his shoulder and placed it on the counter. The sound was a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence. He cleared his throat. It was not a loud sound, but in the hush of the bank it made several people look up. He said quietly but clearly, "The party starts now." The words were strange, theatrical. They didn't fit the solemn atmosphere of the room. He spoke in English, a language he knew would be understood but would also create a sense of distance, of unreality. He then revealed what was in his bag. It was not done with a grand flourish. It was a simple, quiet gesture. A machine pistol, dark and heavy. He did not point it at anyone specifically. He held it in a way that was almost casual, but its presence changed the air in the room completely. The quiet of the bank was no longer peaceful. It was now a tense, waiting silence. He gave his instructions in the same calm voice. He told everyone to lie down on the floor. He asked one of the tellers to call the police. It was a request, not a shout. The young woman nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the phone. Everything was moving in slow motion as if in a dream. There was no screaming, no panic, just a sudden, shocking stillness. The ordinary Thursday had ended. Something new and strange had begun. The small group of people, 3 women and 1 man who worked for the bank, were now his responsibility. He gathered them together, not by force, but with quiet gestures. He led them away from the main hall, toward the wide staircase that descended into the lower levels of the bank. The marble stairs were cool under their feet. Each step echoed slightly. It felt like they were descending into a different world. At the bottom of the stairs was the vault. Its door was immense, a circle of polished steel thick enough to inspire awe. Jana directed one of the employees to open it. The intricate dance of keys and combinations was performed with trembling fingers. Then came the sound of heavy bolts retracting deep within the mechanism. With a low groan, the massive door swung open, revealing a small, windowless room. The air that came out was cool and dry, smelling of concrete and old paper. This was to be their world for the foreseeable future. Jana guided the 4 employees inside. He was not rough. He was, in his own way, reassuring. He was establishing the rules of this new shared reality. The vault was small, perhaps 3 meters by 15. The shelves that usually held safety deposit boxes were mostly empty. A small pile of blankets lay in one corner, left by maintenance workers. Then came the most definitive sound of all. The sound of the heavy vault door swinging shut. It closed with a deep, resonant thud, and the click of the tumblers falling into place echoed in the small space. The light from the hallway was gone, replaced by the steady, sterile glow of a single bare bulb in the ceiling. The sounds of the city, of the world, were gone too. All that remained was the faint hum of the vault's ventilation system and the sound of their own breathing in the sudden, profound silence. Sleepy note. Historical accounts and police records of that day are very clear about the sequence of events. However, the exact nature of Jana's weapon and equipment has been debated over the years. Some reports suggest he had more than was initially seen. Our story tonight focuses only on the documented human experience, the quiet reality of what it was like to be in that room. Jana picked up the telephone inside the vault. It was a direct line, a simple black phone that now served as their only connection to the world they had just left behind. He dialed, and a voice answered, a police negotiator. Jana's tone was as even and calm as it had been all morning. He stated his needs. They were not extravagant, but they were precise. He asked for 3 million Swedish krona. He asked for 2 pistols. He asked for a Ford Mustang, the fast, powerful car of his dreams, to be delivered outside the bank, full of gas. And then he made his most important request. He wanted his friend, Clark Olofsson, brought from his prison cell and delivered to him here in the vault. He is my colleague, Jana explained, as if he were arranging a simple business meeting. The negotiator on the other end of the line was trained to keep people talking, to build a rapport. But Jana was not interested in conversation. He stated his needs clearly, answered a few questions, and then gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click of the phone seemed very loud in the small room. He looked at his 4 hostages. They were sitting on the floor, huddled together. He saw their fear, but he also saw their curiosity. He was a puzzle they were trying to solve. He tried to put them at ease. He told them that nothing would happen to them as long as his requests were met. He spoke to them not as a captor, but almost as a host. He was in control of this small universe, and he wanted it to be a calm one. Outside, the city was in an uproar. Norrmalmstorg was being sealed off. Police cars, their lights flashing silently, formed a perimeter. News reporters were gathering. The world was holding its breath. But inside the vault, there was only the low hum of the fan, the stark light of the single bulb, and the strange, quiet beginning of a long wait. The Swedish government, faced with this unprecedented situation, made a decision. Some of Jana's demands were impossible, but one was not. Giving him his friend, Clark Olofsson, seemed like a potential key to a peaceful resolution. Perhaps Clark could reason with him. Perhaps he could act as a liaison. And so the wheels of the state began to turn in a strange new direction. Clark Olofsson was at that time one of Sweden's most famous criminals. He was charismatic, intelligent, and had a long history of escapes and robberies. When the prison guards came to his cell and told him he was wanted at a bank in the center of Stockholm, he was not surprised. It was just another turn in his unusual life. He was driven through the city, through the police cordons, right up to the front doors of the Kreditbanken. He was a man leaving a prison cell only to enter another, more temporary one. He walked into the silent, empty bank hall and down the marble stairs. The police watched him go. When he reached the vault, he called out Jana's name. The heavy door groaned open just enough for him to slip inside. His arrival changed the atmosphere in the vault immediately. Where there had been one man's quiet, intense energy, there were now 2. Jana and Clark greeted each other like old friends who had not seen each other in years. A handshake, a quiet laugh. Clark looked around the small room at the 4 hostages sitting against the wall. He smiled at them, a warm, disarming smile. "Well," he said softly, "looks like we're all in this together." The hostages, who had been tense and silent, seemed to relax just a little. Clark had a different energy than Jana. He was more talkative, more sociable. He moved around the small space, exploring it, making a small joke about the lack of windows. He was not what they expected. He was not menacing. He was just another person joining them in their strange underground world. With Clark's arrival, the group dynamic shifted. It was no longer just a captor and his captives. It was becoming something else, something more complicated. Her small temporary family, sealed in a box of steel and stone, waiting to see what the world outside would do next. The first day bled into the first night. The concept of time began to change. Without the sun or the moon, the only clock was the steady, unchanging glow of the light bulb above them. The world outside communicated in muffled ways. Food and beer were sent down through a small shaft, a quiet offering from the police. They shared it equally, captors and captives alike. A routine of sorts began to form. They slept in shifts on the hard floor, using the thin blankets for warmth. The vault was always cold, a deep, persistent chill that came from the concrete and steel. They talked. At first, the conversations were hesitant, careful, but as the hours stretched into a day and then 2, the barriers began to fall away. They were 6 people in a room, and their shared predicament was more powerful than the roles they had been assigned. Clark was the social hub. He told stories of his life, funny anecdotes that made the hostages smile. He played checkers with the young male hostage, using pieces of paper they had found. Jana was quieter, more watchful, but he was not unkind. He once draped a blanket over the shoulders of one of the women, Kristin, when he saw her shivering. It was a small, human gesture that was completely at odds with the situation. The hostages, in turn, began to see their captors not as monsters, but as complicated men. They learned about Jana's desire for a new life. They listened as Clark talked about the flaws in the system that had shaped him. They were no longer just the criminals and the victims. They were Jana, Clark, Kristin, Birgitta, Elizabeth, and Sven. They were a community of 6, living in a space no bigger than a small room, while the entire nation watched and waited. The air in the vault was thick with a strange kind of intimacy, a bond forged in fear, boredom, and the shared simple need for human connection. On the 3rd day, the situation inside the vault had developed its own unique sense of normal, but outside, the pressure was mounting. The negotiators wanted to prove that the hostages were safe, and they wanted to speak to one of them directly. Jana agreed. He chose Kristin, one of the female tellers. She was calm and articulate. He handed her the black telephone. On the other end of the line was the Prime Minister of Sweden. The whole country was listening to the broadcast. They expected to hear a voice trembling with fear, a plea for rescue. But that is not what they heard. Kristin's voice was steady, even firm. She described their situation in the vault. She spoke of Jana and Clark, not as terrifying captors, but as their protectors. "I am not afraid of these men," she said, her voice clear in the small room. "They have been kind to us. I am afraid of the police." She explained her logic. She trusted the situation she was in. It was a known reality. The unknown was what the police might do. A sudden raid, a violent intervention. That was what she feared. She asked the Prime Minister to let Jana and Clark leave with them, to let them have the car they asked for. She fully trusted that they would be safe with them. Her words sent a shockwave through the country. No one could understand it. Why was this woman defending the men who were holding her captive? To the world outside, it made no sense, but inside the vault, it made perfect sense. The 6 of them had built their own world, with its own rules and its own loyalties. The greatest threat was not from within their small group, but from the powerful unseen forces who might try to break it apart. Kristin's phone call was a declaration of citizenship in her new temporary nation. After she hung up, Jana gave her a quiet nod of approval. A new, deeper layer of trust had been forged in their strange, shared silence. As the days wore on, the world outside began to intrude in a more physical way. It started as a faint vibration, a low hum that was different from the constant drone of the ventilator. Then it became a sound, A distant, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from above. The police had decided to try and enter the vault from the roof they were drilling. For the people inside the vault, the sound was a constant, unnerving reminder of their isolation. It was the sound of another reality, grinding its way toward them. Sometimes it was a slow, scraping noise. Other times, it was a sharp, percussive drilling that vibrated through the concrete walls. It made sleep difficult. It put everyone on edge. Jana and Clark tried to make light of it. Clark would joke that they had noisy upstairs neighbors, but the sound was a clock ticking down the remaining hours of their strange existence. It was the sound of the outside world losing its patience. The hostages felt a new kind of fear, not of Jana and Clark, but of the rescue itself. They had seen pictures of violent police raids on the news. They imagined chaos, confusion, the risk of being caught in the crossfire. The drilling became a part of the vault's soundscape, blending with the hum of the fan and the murmur of their conversations. It was a strange, industrial heartbeat, counting down to a conclusion that nobody in the room wanted. They had found a strange piece in their steel box, and the sound from above was the sound of that piece being torn apart. They huddled closer together, a small tribe listening to the approaching footsteps of a world they no longer felt a part of. By the morning of the 6th day, the air in the vault had grown heavy. The constant drilling from above had stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The game was in its final moments. There was a quiet resignation in the room. They had been a community for 130 hours, a lifetime in this windowless world. Jana seemed more tense than he had been all week. The calm control was still there, but his eyes were constantly watching, listening. Clark maintained his easygoing manner, but it was thinner now, a mask over his own anxiety. They spoke in low tones with the hostages, offering what reassurance they could. "Whatever happens, stay close to us," Clark advised them. It was a strange inversion of the normal order, the criminals offering protection from the rescuers. Kristin, the hostage who had spoken on the phone, felt a profound sense of sadness. This small, strange family was about to be broken up. She found herself worrying about what would happen to Jana and Clark. Would they be hurt? She looked at these men who had held her life in their hands, and she felt not hatred but a deep, complicated empathy. They shared the last of their water. They sat together on the floor, listening to the silence from the world above. It was more frightening than the drilling had been. It was the silence of a decision being made. The final moments were not filled with frantic plotting or desperate pleas. They were quiet, human. A shared look, a hand on a shoulder. They waited together, as they had done from the beginning, for the end of their world. The end came not with a crash, but with a hiss. A faint, wispy cloud of vapor began to curl into the vault from the newly drilled holes in the ceiling. It was tear gas. It had a sharp chemical smell that caught in the back of the throat. Jana and Clark reacted instantly, telling everyone to lie on the floor and cover their faces with the damp blankets. The room filled with the thick white fog. It became hard to see, hard to breathe. The single light bulb became a fuzzy, indistinct glow. The world dissolved into a cloud of sleep. There was a sense of floating, of disorientation. It was a gentle chemical end to the standoff. There was no violence, just a slow descent into unconsciousness. Sometime later, minutes or perhaps an hour, the sound of the great vault door being forced open broke the silence. Light and fresh air poured in, along with the shadowy figures of police officers in gas masks. They moved through the lingering fog, their shapes alien and intimidating. The hostages began to stir, dazed and coughing. As the police moved to separate them from Jana and Clark, something remarkable happened. The hostages resisted. Kristin and the others physically shielded their captors, shouting at the police not to hurt them. "Don't harm them," they cried. "They didn't harm us." They clung to Jana and Clark, a final protective embrace. The police, stunned by this reaction, had to gently pull them apart. The 6 of them emerged from the bank into the bright August sunlight, blinking against a world that seemed too loud, too large, too fast. They had been gone for 6 days. They had walked down the marble stairs as strangers, and they had come back up as something else entirely, something for which the world as of yet had no name. In the days that followed, the city of Stockholm tried to return to its normal rhythm. The police barricades came down. The shops around Norrmalmstorg reopened. The fountain in the square whispered to itself once more. But a question hung in the air, a deep and puzzling mystery. The police, the psychologists, the reporters, everyone wanted to understand what had happened inside that vault. The hostages were taken to quiet rooms to be interviewed. They were expected to be traumatized, angry, relieved to be free. But they were not. They were calm. They spoke about Jana and Clark with a strange affection. They asked if the men were being treated well. They seemed more worried about their former captors than they did about themselves. One of the women, when asked if she was afraid, said, "The only thing I was afraid of was that the police would come in and start shooting." A criminologist and psychiatrist named Niels Bejerot was assigned to the case. He listened to the interviews, he read the transcripts, and he noticed the profound and consistent pattern. The hostages had bonded with their captors. They had, in a very real sense, switched their allegiance. They saw the police not as rescuers, but as a threat to the stable, predictable world they had created with Jana and Clark in the vault. Sleepy note: it was Niels Bejerot who first gave this phenomenon a name. He initially called it the Norrmalmstorg syndrome, or the Norrmalmstorg syndrome. This term would later be simplified and enter the global vocabulary as Stockholm syndrome, a label used to describe the paradoxical bond that can form between people in intensely stressful captive situations. The mystery was not one of crime, but of the human heart. How could this happen? The answer seemed to lie in those small acts of kindness, the shared food, the blanket for warmth, the calm voices. In a situation of total dependence, the smallest gesture of humanity from a captor can feel like a profound gift. The hostages weren't celebrating a crime. They were responding to the human beings they had come to know in the most intense circumstances imaginable. The world wanted a simple story of good versus evil, but the people who had lived in the vault had a much quieter, more complicated tale to tell. The trials of Jana Olsson and Clark Olofsson were major news, but the testimony of the hostages was once again surprising. They did not paint the men as monsters. They spoke of the calm and the surprising decency they had experienced. Their testimony was a continuation of the strange loyalty that had been born in the vault. Jana was sentenced to prison. He served his time and, upon his release, moved away to start a quiet, new life, far from the headlines. Clark Olofsson's legal journey was more complex, with more trials and appeals, but he too eventually faded from the public eye. They became footnotes in their own famous story. And the hostages. They returned to their ordinary lives. They went back to work, to their families. But they were changed. For years after the event, some of them would visit Jana and Clark in prison. They maintained a connection. In interviews given decades later, they still spoke of the experience with a sense of wonder, not terror. As Kristin once reflected, "I was a hostage, but I didn't feel like a prisoner. He gave me his word, and he kept it." The story of the credit bank and heist became less about the crime itself and more about the enduring psychological puzzle it left behind. It's a story that reminds us that human connection is a powerful, unpredictable force. It can grow in the darkest, coldest, most unlikely of places. It shows that in extreme circumstances, our instincts for survival are tied not just to our safety, but to our need to find common ground, to see the humanity in others, even across the most profound divides. The vault at Norrmalmstorg was a crime scene, but it was also for 6 days a place where a strange and quiet understanding took root, an echo of which can still be felt today. If you go to Stockholm now, to the grand square of Norrmalmstorg, you will find a peaceful, elegant place. The fountain still plays, its water catching the Scandinavian light. The trams still glide by with their soft, chiming bells. The building that once housed the credit bank is still there, a monument of stone and glass. But it is no longer a bank. The ground floor is now a designer clothing store. People walk in and out of those heavy glass doors all day long. They shop for sweaters and scarves. They have no idea that they are walking on the same polished floors where, so many years ago, a group of strangers lay in a tense, waiting silence. They have no idea that just a few meters below their feet, behind layers of concrete and steel, is the vault. It sits there still, dark, empty, and silent. A forgotten room holding the memory of a very strange week. The city has moved on. The story has settled like dust into the pages of history books and psychology journals. It has become a term, a concept. But at its heart, it was always just a story about 6 people in a small, cold room, finding an unexpected warmth in each other while the world outside held its breath. And now, our story is over. The square is quiet for the night. The city of Stockholm is sleeping, dreaming under a sky of soft northern stars. And it is time for you too to rest. Let the story fade. Let the details drift away. There is nothing left to do but to allow yourself the gift of sleep. Thank you for listening. I'll be here again next time with another story. Until then, I hope you'll join the conversation in the comments below quietly and gently if you feel like it. Sleep well.